Hello and welcome to the show. Now, as the old saying goes, when trying to understand criminals and criminality, it's best to follow the money. But today's digital criminality is a far cry from suitcases stuffed with dollar bills or swag bags crammed with coins. With banking increasingly digital first and currencies seemingly going all crypto, pursuing someone's digital purse, should it leave their possession, has become a different ballgame entirely. And boy, do the criminals know it. So, what do we know about today's criminals, their networks, and how they operate? Are digital currencies an ideal platform to launder ill-gotten gains? Is it still possible to follow the money across a blockchain? And how do organized criminal gangs identify the organizations and individuals that they target? Well, speaking of stuffed with dollar bills, joining me today, as always, is Meta Compliance Chief Evangelist and author of Cybersecurity Awareness for Dummies, Robbie O'Brien. Hello, Robbie.
Hi, David. It's good to be here. I think our conversations of late have started to explore the real issues that are causing data breaches, and I think it's a fascinating area, and it's an ever-changing threat landscape, and that's why I'm excited to get talking to our guest today.
Well, speaking of our special guest today, she has a unique insight into organized criminality and plenty of experience in following the money. It is author, advisor, and professional and professor of cybersecurity and behavior at Western Sydney University, Dr. Alana Morishat. Hello, Alana. Good to meet you.
Well, lovely to meet you as well.
Fantastic. That is a breezy background. You're actually in Australia right now, but you're not from Australia, are you?
No, I'm originally from Canada, and I've worked and lived on every continent but for the Antarctic, but I've made Australia my home for the last 14 years.
There's still time with the Antarctic, I'm sure. Who knows where these next generation data centers cramming all of their AI computing are going to cool themselves. Maybe Antarctica is a rich place to explore. Anyway, Alani, your experience in the cybersecurity and fraud space, it's very broad indeed. So we'll be pulling on some of those threads in our conversations today. But you didn't begin in technology or in information security, did you? You started out more on the law side of things. Just tell us briefly about your journey.
Well, when I was a kid, my dad would buy satellite dishes in Canada, so it was perfectly legal at the time to steal all of the US signals, so you could get 500 channels as opposed to the first three, the only three that we had in Canada at the time. But in order to do that, you had to get certain kind of chips, embed them into the satellite, and constantly reprogram orbital positions. And my father used to pay us allowance to my brother and myself to do that. And then he used to offer our services to everybody else who wanted to have a satellite. So I got into tech that way, and then later studied law. When I was studying law at McGill and later University of Ottawa, I had some tech classes, and I found the materials really natural and easy because I suppose I technically had been hacking into systems from a very young age without knowing hacking was a thing.
Wow, that's absolutely fascinating. So you started off on the wrong side of the rails, then studied law, and I guess realized a little bit more about what it was that you were doing. Talk to me about what happened in Hong Kong, hearing your story in the past, and maybe how that changed your trajectory more on the tracks that you are now.
So I was always in the law tech side of things, but not necessarily the cybersecurity and cybercrime side of things. So when I was at HKU, there were two particular people who we were always having our computers infected. One was a lovely Chinese scholar from mainland China, and then myself. And the IT guy used to accuse us of surfing pornography at work because we had all of these weird virus issues. And it used to make us howl with laughter because that's not what was happening. I had my theory. The other professor had her theory. Her theory was that cyber criminals were in her network trying to steal her banking. And my theory was that nefarious political entities were in my account. Who knows what was correct, but the reality of today's scenario is probably likely both in any given context. And so I really switched my attention to that area, and that would have been around 2001. I became fascinated with how technology could be exploited for all sorts of things, not from way beyond computer viruses to thinking about cybercrime and all others. And at the time I was laughed at. And here we are 20 some years later when the world is a much, unfortunately, worse place. So I'm very unhappy to have been right, if that makes any sense.
Gosh, when you think back to 2001, it was still boot sector viruses on 3.5 inch, 3.5 inch floppy disk drives, and Windows 95 and Windows ME viruses and so on. Just paint a picture of where you are and what you do. I mean, Australia, clearly beautiful beach by the looks of it behind you, although I'm not sure if that's a live view. But just tell us a bit about exactly what you're involved in now, or as much as you're allowed to tell us anyway.
Sure. So I came to Australia to do a PhD, and I infiltrated a number of cybersecurity entities. So many of the people fighting the good fight, many of the people doing not so nice things, and then a mixture of gray. So the vast majority of companies and people that I met were kind of in between the two. So this notion of black hat and white hat hacker, I think, is non-existent. I think that there are acts that fall more towards unethical, illegal components versus legal and more ethical components, but I think that various cultures perceive those activities in a very different way. So most of what I've encountered over the last 20 years is very much in the gray. So I started out in law, and I had the lofty ambition of doing a decent PhD. I found myself being one of the only people in law and cybersecurity in the world. There would have been maybe 20 global at that time. And so you were just kind of thrown into it. So people would contact me from all sorts of the planet wanting legal advice on a range of just different things. And I would give out the information freely. Some of these people were criminals. Some of them were starting their own companies. Some of them were wanting to know the limits of what they could do within their own organization. Some of them were government organizations. And so there was never a dull day. And from there, my journey grew, and I began to be increasingly fascinated with computer science. Like I said before, I'd been doing computer science for a very long time, predominantly programming in COBOL, but then I self-educated and really got into the technical side of things for a number of years. Fast forward, I now run a security operations center that helps small businesses. I'm a professor, and I sit on advisory boards for a range of companies, both in the cybercrime investigation space, cybersecurity companies, and I volunteer my time with organizations such as Crime Stoppers and the International Center for Missing and Exploited Children.
Wow. Fascinating, broad work that you do there. Robbie, one of the things that Alana mentioned there that I just want to pick up on with you is gray areas, and about how very rarely in life are things black and white, and particularly when it comes to cyber crimes, there's a lot of gray areas in which cyber criminals tend to lurk, isn't there?
Well, I think it's a reflection of life. It's a reflection of our digital lives. And you have every political aspiration involved there, every sort of ideological view being expressed, and it's no surprise that you're getting that reflection. And also, I think it's no surprise that as the whole world goes digital, that the criminal community would just follow everybody into it. And as you were talking about 3.5-inch floppy drives, I mean, we're on a journey where the situation is morphing to reflect the increased use of technology, and indeed this movement from fiat or physical money through to digital money.
Yeah.
And I think that just brings a brand new dimension to everything we've been doing this far.
Yeah, let's come on to that in that case. And Alana, part of your work is about recovery of stolen digital assets. And I want to ask you in a moment about what you've learned about how organized crime gangs work and about how they've evolved over the years. But Robbie, first back to you. Stories of individuals and businesses' crypto stashes going missing or being misappropriated. They seem almost as old as the cryptocurrencies themselves, don't they? And barely anyone with any skin in the crypto game seems to be immune, do they?
So I know we talked about this already, and I had my own personal experience about, well, a couple of years ago, I got a couple of Bitcoin, and it came about as a friend of mine was telling me stories about he had got a few, he's retired and he had a few Bitcoins, but he kept being asked by people to give them give their businesses his Bitcoins because they needed to pay ransomware. So at that time, people were finding it, businesses anyway, were finding it really difficult to get access to cryptocurrency to pay the ransoms. Anyway, I decided to get involved, and I used a crypto exchange, very large global crypto exchange called Celsius. But it just shows you in life, your choices come back to haunt you, because in July 2022, they filed for bankruptcy. And at that time, there was lots of other exchanges that had, dubious business practices or whatever. I don't know the ins and outs that went to the wall, FTX, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And there's been a process ever since in Chapter 11 and the usual, advisors making millions and millions off this. But through that, I experienced a number of things. The first thing is the amount and sophistication of phishing emails that came to everybody who was a customer of Celsius was just staggering. Clearly, the customer list for Celsius had either been hacked or else had been sold to people. So you became, fair game. But to add insult to injury, David, 2 weeks ago, I think it was 2 weeks ago, the law firm in the States that is handling the Chapter 11 bankruptcy had their email service hacked.
Oh no.
On the basis of a phishing email. So I'm seeing cyber and crypto, criminality right up front, and it's not pretty. And you feel very helpless. There's no doubt about it. I mean, because in a crime, you can go to the police and say that person stole my wallet, yada yada yada. In the digital space, it's like it's far out somewhere, and it's things that are bigger than you. So, it has been a very painful learning experience for me.
In the crypto spaces, a lot of it goes underreported. And if you go to the police, you don't actually get help. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. There's a range of reasons for that. But a lot of it goes unreported due to shame and embarrassment, especially in the crypto investment scam area, which is probably the rifest area of scams globally at the moment. And people shouldn't be as upset as they are when they get taken for a scam. In some of the investigations we've worked on, the people behind these scams are politicians, people with serious marketing and finance degrees from significant universities. These are not little hoodlums hanging out trying to figure out how to take money. These are educated, sophisticated players designing organized crime to steal your money.
In the work that I do, I work a lot with victims of cryptocurrency scams, and people feel foolish, people feel embarrassed, people don't want to tell their friends, let alone go in the media and talk about it. But very often, and the saying goes in legitimate business as well as in crime, repeat business is good business. And it sounds to me as though, Robbie, the criminals definitely know this, which is why you see victims of crime, victims particularly, it seems, involving financial fraud and cryptocurrency type fraud. They are repeatedly targeted, sometimes by smooth operators who will say, oh yes, well, we know about Celsius in your case. We can help you hunt those assets down. Of course, they've got very little intent of doing that, and they are related or adjacent to the original criminals in the first place. However, Alana, an area that you are involved in, of course, is helping to understand the criminality behind cryptocurrency scams. I'm curious about why cryptocurrency is such a I guess, a well-trodden path, a well-trodden technology for organized crime groups. What have you learnt about why they swarm around cryptocurrency? Is it simply because there are a lot of gaping holes in security at the moment, or is it because it is, in theory, difficult to trace?
The first reason is because there's a lack of regulation. So the laws haven't caught up in the same way that they're comprehensively involved with banks, and any kind of other lender and loan brokers. The crypto regulations are catching up, but they're not there yet. So crypto up until a long time was self-regulated, and self-regulation never works, full stop, in any industry. So lack of regulations was the first thing. The second thing is initially cryptocurrency. Well, it's a bright, shiny object. Humans are attracted to bright, shiny objects. Just put the word AI in front of an investment and you'll find you'll instantly have more money. Put the buzzword in. It's a marketing thing throughout the history of humankind. We are attracted to marketing terms and shiny objects. So that's the second component. The third component is when crypto first came out, it was untraceable. And so you had a lot of people thinking, this is untraceable and I will hide my money there. So the number one reason that crypto is used is for money laundering from all sorts of types of people. So we've even worked a lot of cases where couples that are divorcing, they move all of their money into crypto thinking it's all there safe and secure behind in order to hide their assets, to politicians of major nations siphoning out political funds. You name it, it's used for money laundering en masse, from an individual all the way up to organizations. But what a lot of people don't realize is that crypto is less anonymous than they might think at the moment, with certain kinds of cryptos being more susceptible. So the reason why this isn't in the news is because intelligence and law enforcement agencies have been burned by the courts, okay? So courts will come in, judges thinking they're doing really wonderful things for the planet and politicians, and they will have a case. There was a case in a jurisdiction, without shaming, that forced a major mobile phone company to reveal the source code and unlock it in order to solve a theft. And by doing that, the company shares plummeted after the decision, and the security was compromised on that device globally, rendering it the number one choice for cyber criminals. Fast forward 10, 15 years, it's actually a very secure device because it doesn't have a market anymore. But that's besides the point. Law enforcement and intelligence agencies now will hide their capability and never give it up in a court. If it means setting someone free, if they have to disclose the capability they have, they won't do it anymore. Because they do have those. The only way they can stay even remotely in the game is through some of the capabilities that they utilize that are not readily known in the media.
There are websites that we've been to in the past, for example, where there has been a ransomware attack and the screenshots of the Bitcoin wallet address are available. And there are websites you can go to very easily publicly available, where you can see what that wallet looks like, how many donations there have been, how many uploads there have been to that wallet. But as soon as things start moving around those wallets, that's where, and that the money laundering process can get very, very convoluted, tracing all of those assets as they move around. I guess it's automatable, and maybe that's what you're talking about here.
It's still, those blenders can still be traced. They're just not utilized for anything. It would have to be a very serious crime for capability to step in to trace through what's known as a blender or a mixing technology. The other thing is that in other instances, depending on the nature of the crime and the organization using that crypto, they don't bother to disguise anything, because they're politically protected. It's irrelevant that you can trace them.
Wow. Okay. This feels like a big, very important can of worms that that we could open here. And I guess that leads me on to the next question. And again, I advise caution about, well, you know what you can and can't say, but I'm curious as to who these criminals are. Are we talking about individuals? Are we talking about teens in their bedroom? Or are we talking about massive organized crime groups, some of whom are financially motivated, some of whom may have other motivations as well?
Well, both, but predominantly massive organized criminal syndicates that operate like tech companies. If you have the misfortune to visiting one of these sites, whether it's cybercrime, fraud, or other, you will quickly see that they look like legitimate companies. Sometimes, and I repeat, only sometimes, some of the technical people working at the company don't even know they're in cybercrime because they're only tasked to do one really small part of the operation. And so they actually think they're working for a legitimate company.
Wow.
Now,
Wow.
most of the time, that's not been the case in my experience, and
Yeah.
people cry and scream murder that they didn't know what they were doing, blah, blah, blah. It's just so not the case. It's a case of willful blindness in much of it, but not always. And so at the end of the day, it's a human dealing with a human, and you have to be sympathetic to both parties up to different degrees.
I mean, certainly that ignorance about your job role, we see that in money muling quite a lot. People being recruited, we know, whether that's students at university just to do what appears to be some simple tasks. And then, of course, yes, they are part of a much bigger operation there. Robbie, does any of this surprise you? I'm guessing not, because I know you are a paranoid by design kind of
Paranoid by
guy.
design, Dave. It's the
Yeah.
only way forward. It is. Live your life through paranoia. It works. But I think you've got money, right? And we've all seen those situations where you've got a scam organization and they take over an entire village. You're driving through some village in the Philippines and everybody's wearing Prada and designer, and you're going, what's going on here? It's because everybody's working. And all the various people are paid off because it's such a unbelievably lucrative business. So I think Alana's point about geographical stroke political protection has always been there, and I think as the world continues to sort of polarize, that's going to be a thing, and we're back to age old, pirates, where you're trying to physically conduct either physical or digital business. And there's ways that people can come along and steal from you. It's been there from time immemorial, and this is just digital piracy.
And speaking of recruitment, how do you onboard, or how do these groups onboard people into these organized crime groups? Is it word of mouth? Are there more organized educational routes that these criminals are able to recruit and educate through, Alana?
It's a full range depending on the type of scam. There's different criminal entities that specialize in different types of cybersecurity attacks, different types of cybercrimes and fraud and investment. They're highly specialized. So you see certain kinds of specializations coming from different parts of the world. So it's not as simple as that. There's been some interesting research where whole villages and towns become lucrative overnight. And so the whole town is running on cybercrime, like it's part of the economy. There are whole nation states running on cybercrime. Let's not even forget that at the moment. So those two factors play out. In other means, the business really is not dissimilar to any other type of corporate business, in that you look for cheap labor that's skilled up enough to get your product or your service through the door. And so you would look for cheaper labor markets. So you raised the example of the Philippines, but I can almost promise you that there's no Filipino or Filipina person who's heading up that criminal entity. That is almost always someone from the West, someone from Russia, someone from China, someone from Israel. These massive scams that we see, they move to where the cheap labor is, but don't pick on the Philippines. Those are people trying to make a living. And the heads of these scams do not reign from those particular countries. And so they move to where the labor is cheap and where they have languages, equivalent services to try and peddle their products.
I mean, they're just really using the same outsource model that tech companies use, where they put their development centers or their call centers in value centers, value areas where you get a arbitrage on the labor rates.
Correct.
And Alana, one of the things you and I talked about before is these guys have ideal client profiles. They have vertical markets that they focus on. They focus on particular levels of business. So you'd have organizations that focus on SMEs, and then organizations that focus on the mid-market. And I thought that was fascinating. Maybe you could maybe throw some light on that.
Yeah, so different entities don't just go and try to whack-a-mole and find any entity that they can to scam. It's quite a lot more sophisticated and targeted at that. So the business model changes based on who you're trying to scam, kind of like who you're trying to attract for clientele if you were a legitimate business. So one thing we've noticed in many of these areas is that some types of scams or cybersecurity attacks will start in a sector. So that sector will be affected and it will automatically spread throughout the sector. Because typically what happens in any sector, whether it's medical, finance, or other, is that everybody adapts what they think is best practice and they all copy one person's model. Or one company supplies to the same people because they have a monopoly and it's the same solution everywhere. So it becomes an easy target once you're in one of the vectors to continue that segment. And so you will find, for example, that if something spreads within a segment, not only does it spread within a market sector, but it spreads with a similar amount. That's the craziest thing here. So the amounts that are targeted are also specific to that sector. So it's not just random. If the typical business transaction of one business is 40,000, the types of cyber crimes you'll see committed typically against them will be looking at similar rates. And so people need to understand that this is automated in the same way that many of our legitimate systems and processes are automated, and it's not, there is nothing low level about these operations.
When you talk about amounts, you talk about ransomware demands.
Ransomware and payment diversion fraud, which actually makes up for significantly more of the economic crime market at the moment. But scams top both of those things.
So these guys have like a sophisticated pricing matrix the same way as software companies have.
Yes, I've negotiated one ransom, but it was really quite amusing for me to go back and forth between there, because you would say, oh, we can't afford that. And then they would produce all of your economic projections for the next 6 months. And they knew how much you were indemnified for cyber insurance. There was even one reported, it wasn't in the one that I was doing, where one of the cyber criminals was in like the online session that all of the stakeholders were holding to decide what to do with the ransom.
Oh, wow. They were in deep.
Like,
That's incredible.
you know, like they do the reconnaissance
Mm.
extremely well. And so you're not going to get some kind of crazy demand. And payment diversion fraud is even more precise.
By payment diversion fraud, is that email-driven payment diversion
Yeah, so
fraud?
anytime you have, let's say, a legitimate invoice or payment that needs to be made to a business, but somehow that payment gets derailed and it looks like you're paying that business, but that payment actually goes somewhere else.
Yeah.
That's either known as business email compromise or payment diversion fraud.
The
So
$50 billion fraud of the FBI call email compromise at the moment.
yeah, and it's becoming harder to detect. And so that one is really worrying. To me, it's far more worrisome than ransomware at the moment, given the techniques. So lateral phishing is really becoming a thing. And most of the training modules that companies use are crap. They're utter crap for phishing, because phishing no longer really works. The types of phishing coming into organizations and government no longer work with funny URLs. And components like that are bad English. Those phishes are coming in from an account, usually at a privileged access level, that's coming through and reading like a legitimate email. It's even from a legitimate sender. And there's almost nothing in that email that goes noticed to someone. There might be slight tips here and there, but there's nothing in some of the samples we've seen that could tip someone off.
You know, not only do they have sophisticated emails, they also have really clever ways to bypass, you know, multi-factor authentication with combination frauds, you know, websites built on spec. And I think for me personally, we are reaching a stage where email is not fit for purpose. And so, for example, we would hire contractors from the likes of Upwork or Fiverr, and you have a complete communication with the people in that service, and you never use email, you use the platform. So I think we're going to see more and more closed environments like Slack, like Microsoft Teams, and then really people having systems, either electronic systems that are outside of email, that no human intervention, and we'll have an evolution of response to this. But I agree that the early day silly emails that we're looking for had spelling problems, and clearly the person didn't have English as their first language. I mean, ChatGPT has done away with that, and I think one of our guests said that in Japan, cyber crime has increased by 400% due to the fact that they can access the Japanese language with AI. So it's just a case of an arms race. You have to improve the training. You have to improve the defenses as the threats evolve.
In terms of which companies are being targeted here, and Alana, you mentioned about how often we'll find criminals staying within a sector. Something else that I think we're beginning to see, and we've spoken, Robbie, about third-party threats in the past, about how particular types of software are compromised. Even in the news today here in the UK, we've heard news of armed forces, the payroll service being compromised. And we've seen a lot of breaches, it seems, over the last 2 years, maybe more, where specifically hackers have targeted payroll services, financial services, I guess because they know the types of information that they're able to get there. And once one group has found success with this payroll software, of course, others are going to copy that as well. Do you tend to see that as well in your research, Alana?
Yeah, I mean, it's copy, they share. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, they share techniques and strategies because there's more, in most instances, there's more money in sharing than there is in hoarding. So you share the market and then you provide a license, right? So if you want to use my information or components, you either buy that technique or you subscribe for a license for it. Like, that's a thing. Or they'll make a crimeware kit or a tool that you can purchase. And then they additionally provide training for a fee as well.
And in terms of the size of organizations as well, do we see that it's the big corporations, the big bucks that the criminals will follow, or are they more likely to go for the small, medium enterprises for, well, I guess maybe reasons of there isn't such an established or such a large cybersecurity team who are protecting their workforce against the threats coming in? Do you see any particular targeting there?
No, not at all. So they would just target for higher money or higher value at a larger organization, and a smaller money, smaller value, but target more organizations if they were going for SMEs. So the business model is just slightly different. You go for, if you're a, I don't know what the readers, cheap discount stores or grocery stores, right? You tend to go in there for one thing and you buy 5 because it's only $2 each, as opposed to going into a luxury brand store where you go for one ticket item because it's very expensive if you have the same budget. It is no different in the cybercrime world. The economics work where you would develop your economic strategy to target a large organization for a much larger sum of money, because typically it will take you a longer time and you'll have more investment to compromise that organization. Whereas if you're targeting an SME, you assume that their cyber defenses are lower and there'll be a lot less resistance to compromise. So you compromise more organizations with the same amount of time.
But Robbie, in terms of the work that you do you find, and I know at Meta Compliance, you're all about targeting, making sure that your engagements with employees are very specific to their job role, to their function, the kind of exposure that they may pose. Do you find that that's different when working with the big organizations versus the SMEs, sometimes where you might find individuals, particularly on the smaller end of that SME scale, sometimes wearing multiple hats in their day-to-day job?
An SME cannot survive a cyber attack as easily as a bigger company. you know, that their reputation, their capital, their cash flows. Those are things where the SME just ceases to exist. And really, it's more an attitude. It's more a paranoid approach. And you tend to find the people that go to those events, they're looking for practical ways to implement. They're not looking for a tick box. There's no compliance concept whatsoever. It's like, help me out here. What can I do? And you know, the advice is the same. You know, password is your biggest problem. So password managers, multi-factor authentication. If you know, taking on new payment, you know, new suppliers for payment, and someone looking to change supplier details, all those things. And they typically haven't heard that. They typically haven't heard that specifically. And I think a lot of people go away and actually do implement real change.
Or even updating from Windows 10.
Yes.
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 Which is completely unsupported and unpatched.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, companies don't realize that. What? But I brought my product. What do you mean? What? They don't know. And then if you use the metaphor, it's like, okay, well, would you leave all the windows of your business open, the doors wide open, with a sign that said, come in and steal what you want? And they said, well, of course not. And I said, well, when you're running on Windows 10, that's what you're doing.
And to extend the analogy, would you use the same key for your front door, your back door, your car, your safe? That's the password manager thing, because human nature is we're pretty unimaginative when it comes to passwords.
Well, that said, startups are more secure than other small businesses. So I feel like that's what we need to lead to.
Yeah. Okay. Tell us about that. Why do you assert that to be the case?
I assert that to be the case because a lot of startups that we see that these day and age globally are embedded into incubators and innovation launch areas. And so those kinds of companies that come through those kind of incubators get all of this other support that other SMEs don't. Cybersecurity and privacy engineering being two of those things that they get amongst a million other things. And so what we have seen is a lot of the startups coming, especially in the digital space, are thinking about cybersecurity from the get-go. It's not an after fact. They built it right into their products. And so that innovation space is actually playing a really pivotal role in new companies coming forward with a more cybersecure maturity posture.
What about incident response when you are an SME, when you don't have that resource, when you maybe don't just have the time because you're a small business fighting against the big boys to go through all of the incident response preparedness that ideally would be a good place? What challenges do Alana's small businesses face there, and what kind of things do you reckon they can do to try and fight, well, I guess stand as good a chance as being resilient as possible when something bad does happen?
Well, do you know how a lot of people have magnets on their fridges with the emergency numbers to call for different things? Have the number for cyber. So you got fire, you've got ambulance, you've got whatever. Have the one number that you can call for cyber. So depending on where you're located on the world, believe it or not, most people, when they get hit, they panic. If they have an IT supplier or department, they call them. But in my experience, that's not always the best place to start. Believe it or not, your cloud provider, if you have a cloud provider, call them straight away. They're a lot more helpful than you might think. Your internet service provider is a lot more helpful than you might think. And your bank is very helpful. So everyone's moving to crypto, but crypto companies do nothing to support you when things go wrong. Your banks still do. And so we can rage on against banks, but they have huge cybersecurity teams that assist each and every day on a range of issues. And so maybe it's a government agency that you call, but just at least have a number to call when things go wrong.
The other thing that I think, like Alana's posters or telephone numbers, is to have a WhatsApp group or a chat group of something. It doesn't have to be WhatsApp, but that is separate to your internal business organizational technology, because you need to get to those people, and you need to make sure that the people that are part and parcel of the incident response actually know the incident's happening, and everybody is on board. And the number of times I've seen that sort of not be kept up to speed, or the person that owned the WhatsApp group has retired and maybe has nobody can find them. That aspect of communication is absolutely crucial as well.
Alana, you've done a lot of analysis into criminal groups, clearly a lot of engagement with them as well. But what have you learned about the compromised companies? Is there something that they tend to have in common? As we said, repeat business is good business. Is there anything that identifies a company as a good target, or indeed as a repeat target for attackers?
Repeat target, all companies are vulnerable, so I don't think there's one company over the other, but cyber criminals tend to go for the easier market. So if they're going to choose one company over the other, if you're doing things just a little bit better than the other company, they're going to go for the easier target, always. Okay, because people don't like to create extra value or work for no particular reason. There's no value in that extra work. But what I have noticed is the following. And this actually breaks my heart. When you deal with a company that's been breached and they do a couple of measures after to secure their cybersecurity posture, they inevitably always think they're never going to be breached again. And that is just not the case. It's like saying, humans think this way, they never think something's going to happen to them or that it'll happen twice. So even if you think about the first time you get into a fender bender with a car and you think, okay, I'll never do that again. I'll drive a little bit differently. I'll pay more attention to this or that. And then you actually exit thinking, I'm never going to get in a car accident again. And then we all know, yeah, you get into more fender benders and you bump up more bumpers and tires, and cyber's no different. It's going to repeatedly happen to you. The best thing you could do is to prepare yourself not to have a huge accident, to make sure they're just fender benders.
Listen, we are almost out of time today. Thank you so much. We've covered so much ground today, like I say, from I guess angling in on the cryptocurrency side here and what these digital currencies mean for how money moves today, how criminals will follow that money, how traceable or not it is, how organizations, I guess, maybe see themselves as targets or not, and indeed the instant response thing as well. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. And Alana, we've absolutely loved having you on the show today. Where can people find out more about your work online?
If you literally type Alana and cybersecurity, it comes up. So Alana Banana, cybersecurity, you can find me. If you can't find me, then you need new skills. I'm easily findable.
Very good. Thank you. Robbie, speaking of responding to big cyber incidents, Meta Compliance, you've recently released season 3 of your Netflix-style crime drama miniseries, Cyber Police. Tell us about that.
Yes, and Cyber Police is proving to be an outrageously good way to teach people about the threats that they experience, that real world people experience, and it follows that whole paranoid, be on your guard type thing, but in the form of a crime series. We've just dropped season 3. It's going down a bomb with all the customers they're loving it, and it's just a brand new way to actually get people to consume the learning. So that has happened recently, and I think interestingly we get millions of people coming and watching it because it goes out across all those large customers that we have, and it's a real treat for me.
Well, thank you, Alana, for joining us today. Hope to speak to you again soon.
Lovely. Thank you for having me today.
And Robbie, as always, thank you very much.
Thank you, David.
And thank you all for tuning in today too. Until next time, bye-bye.